I'm your host, Tim Wood. Welcome to The Natural You, where we'll be interviewing guests from different backgrounds and all walks of life to discuss our relationship with nature and how we can better connect to the natural world, both in us and around us. Nature already has all the answers we need to be healthier and happier in all aspects of our lives. Listen up to hear how to access more of The Natural You. Susan van der Spuy is a mother of 3 amazing boys and an adoring grandmother. She was a Montessori preschool teacher for 23 years. She has an honours degree in psychology and is a registered counsellor in South Africa, specialising in the fields of trauma and pastoral counselling. In her waiting list practice, she uses play therapy in a child-centred, non-directive approach, assisting in the emotional health of children and teenagers. In addition to her work with children, she helps adults with trauma counselling, parental coaching, and runs workshops around these topics. Well, welcome, Sue. I'm super chuffed to have you talking with us today. I've known you for a long time, and I'm often chatted to you about your different aspects of your work in counselling, and I'm very intrigued about your work in play therapy, and obviously your Montessori background. Can you just tell us a little bit about how you kind of got into Montessori and how that maybe led you to where you are now?
Sure. Thanks, Tim, for this opportunity to have a chat with you. I have been very privileged to be involved with children from a very young age myself. I have always had a love for children, and as I got older and had my own children, I studied to be a Montessori directress and then ran a little Montessori preschool for 2 to 4 year olds for over 20 years, and really got to understand children and the different temperament types that you have, the different behaviors, and always wanted to study further in psychology. So I took the leap in my late 30s, early 40s, and studied to become a counselor, a registered counselor in South Africa. That means you have your honours in psychology with a special interest area in children, making use of play therapy and trauma. So trauma being my main area, and also doing pastoral work, but mostly that for adults. So Montessori was to me the most amazing platform to begin, because Maria Montessori was one of the first people to acknowledge that children are actually incredibly intelligent. They're little sponges that will literally soak up whatever they're being exposed to. And she also believed about there being sensitive periods in children's development where it takes no effort to learn. They are open and susceptible to learning to read at a very young age, learning to write a lot earlier than a lot of the world systems use. But it was just working with children where I realized that whatever's happening in the life of the child's environment, people in the child's environment, is going to impact them. So I have been enjoying working one-on-one with children through play therapy.
Wow, amazing. And for me, the wonder of childhood, and that to play is almost a natural state, and all through childhood. And as we get older, we seem to lose that. And I know that for me, one of my powerful experience was after a deep breath work and a guided meditation that took me to meet my childhood self. It was just a super, what a blessing to kind of reconnect with the inner child. And I wonder how your work perhaps fosters that. Obviously, in little kids, that's easy. But as we get older into teenagers and adults, do we still have access to that, or how do you bring that through?
I think less and less, because of technology, which is consuming so much of children's time that they are forgetting that essence of play, which we call play is the language of a child. But as they start getting into late 12, 13-year-olds, they don't really want to play the way we see it, but they're interacting with people. So it moves more from maybe frivolous, playful games that don't necessarily have a meaning consciously to engaging with people. But there I find that because children aren't actually socializing as much and it's all being done over digital and social media, the children are are not learning the social nuances, the subtle things about relationships. So I would say that that would be one of the big factors in losing touch with our playfulness, because it's when you're in contact with somebody and you feel your energy, or you give them a little punch like that, or you making it, and touch
Yeah.
is what elicits that. And being in close proximity is where people start opening up.
So that interaction is and that physical element, and that tactile component, and I assume the sort of facial expressions and all those little nuances of even voice. So even now when we're talking now, depending on how good our microphones and speakers are, we can, some of those inflections in the voice might be just compressed and we might miss something, and you're not there to hear that little laughter, or perhaps the screen isn't so clear. And the rest of your body, I mean, we're just watching ourselves from the shoulders up now. What are my hands doing? You can't see that, and I'm very, with my hand, I talk with my hands all the time. So what are we missing in those body language things too?
And we're missing a lot, definitely. But to get back to the relationship, because in play therapy, the relationship between the person facilitating the play therapy and the child, is the relationship is pivotal. There has to be a relationship of trust and of feeling safe. So that is what will guide the process. And that is why if children grow up in an environment where they feel safe, and that's emotional safety more than, well, physical counts, absolutely, but emotional safety, they're going to be able to be themselves. But as soon as children have been exposed to trauma and they either do not feel safe or they are unsafe people in their environment, they're living in a permanent state of fight, flight, or freeze. And that is hugely detrimental to the development of the brain, because we know that the prefrontal cortex, which governs all executive functioning and emotional control and emotional awareness, that is only finished developing between 18 and 25 years old.
18 to 25, that late? Wow.
Yes, a lot of people don't realize it is that late. And that is why we have to be so incredibly cognizant and mindful of what we are allowing into our children's lives, minds, in their spaces where they operate, where they're supposed to be safe. And play therapy, and that is amazing, is you create that safe space and you give undivided attention. And suddenly you see these little children that have got a mask on, or they're incredibly tense, or they're extremely angry. You just see how it starts melting away. And I must say, in COVID, when everybody was wearing masks, it would be extremely significant to me to see when children wanted to wear the mask or when they took it off, because I said they could take it off on a one-on-one. And some of them wanted it on because it was a form of protection.
Yeah.
Or resistance, not seeing into me. But as soon as they trusted me without being even conscious of it, they'd whip it off or pull the hoodie back, or take off another layer of clothing, kick off their shoes and started getting real, touching the ground, that sort of thing.
Yeah. And so maybe can you give us a scenario of how you play with the kids? And I know, you say it's child directed, but what does that mean in practice?
Basically, the child comes in and I tell them that they are going to be in control of this session. They're going to choose what they want to play with, how they want to play with it, whether I join in or if I just watch. And everything is set out for them to be able to see. And you give them the boundaries which make you feel safe.
When you say everything, what's in the space? What do you have?
I'll explain to you now. I just want to quickly explain the boundaries, because that creates safety. Is we're not allowed to hurt one another, and we're not allowed to break the toys on purpose. And we have to finish after 45 minutes. So that's the boundaries.
Yeah.
And within that, they are free. So I have a sand tray, which does incredible work on the unconscious, quite a big sand tray with lots and lots of miniatures. Then I will have toys that represent releasing of anger. I have toys that represent nurturing, creative toys. We have toys that are for make-believe. So when they can become a different persona and play with that. We have the typical doll's house where a lot of environmental things play out. A lot of different kinds of rescue vehicles, police cars, ambulances, fire engines, and the way they play with that is all hugely significant. We also have a little play area, which is like a house to reenact. We can have things like a little tent that children can climb into if they want that kind of space. Can have a baby bottle, blankets, pillows, anything. And what the child chooses is driven by an unconscious desire. And all behavior is meeting a need. So if you can just allow the play and allow them to lead, they'll often say, I want to play Lego. Right, what would you like to do with the Lego? You constantly throw it back to them. I want to build an XYZ. Right, do you want me to watch or do you want to do it by yourself? And then they might say, no, I want you to play with me. I want you to play with me. And then they're looking for that engagement, whereas other children will turn their back on you and will do what they're doing without wanting you to see. And that would all be explaining different things. So we look for themes in play therapy. Themes of feeling safe or unsafe, death play or sexualized play, anger play, nurturance play. We also have the one of empowerment and mastery play. That is when the child is beginning to heal in their journey, that they'll start playing more and more of those kind of
Wonderful
things than the releasing.
Fantastic. And so
I thought to give you an example
yes.
of how nature comes in to children's play. If you took a child outside, and I don't know if you can remember as a kid, but I can surely, we would go down to a dam and there would be this thick kind of mud, which is really like pottery clay. And one child will take the clay and make little balls and start hitting everybody, throwing them with that intentionally to hurt them, which would show there's a lot of anger and aggression in that child. The other child might be playing a game of taking a stick and flicking the clay ball off to see how far it can go with somebody in a competitive kind of way. That is the mastery and empowerment play. Whereas if another little kid took that ball of clay and was fashioning a little animal or perhaps a little house, a clay house with a reed roof, that would be creative. So all of that would tell us something about where the child is at.
Fantastic. And it must be really rewarding to see the kids just maybe going through those phases and releasing and working with them.
Absolutely, it is incredible.
And then how do we, we spoke early on about the environment, obviously the family environment, social environment, physical environment. How do you then bring that, how do you feed back to the parents? Because I guess that's sort of key, and how do they then support the work? Because people who are going to be listening now are going to go, okay, I can see that perhaps in my kid, or maybe I can recognize some of those elements. How do we get the parent to support this? As you said, all behaviors are meeting a need. So how do we as parents allow that to happen? What space do we need to provide for our kids, and how do we support them?
I think it's absolutely pivotal to have an idea of age around this, because if you're working with children 11 and under, you can't work without the parents being involved in the process, because a child is part of a system and the family is the system. And often if there's something that the child is struggling with, you need to work with the system. Either there might be a dysfunction in the system, or there might just be a stressor, or they might just need some education in that space. So after a couple of sessions, it's imperative you bring the parents in, you discuss what's coming out. And I take photos of different scenes that the children have possibly played in the sand tray, or in a house they've built, or artwork that they've done. And I show it to the parents, so they can't argue with me when they see it in black and white. And I've never had a parent that hasn't wanted the best for their child. Even a parent who is not maybe what we as society would deem a really good parent, they still want the best for their child. They just don't know how, or they are parenting from their own wounding. So if you can encourage parents and give them tips and tools, that is imperative. But from the 12, 13-year-old onwards, Teenagers need to know that what you are talking about is not going to go out of that room. Otherwise, they are not going to open up.
It's that safety again, isn't it?
Yes. So you need to tell them that whatever they tell you will stay here. And then, unless the three times I would have to break confidentiality was if there was abuse, if I was subpoenaed by a court of law, or if there was a threat to a life. If they said tonight they're going to cut themselves or they're going to take overdose of pills, then you have to break confidentiality. But you tell that up front. And then sometimes they tell you quite hairy things, and you feel, oh my word, I wish I could tell the parent, because hopefully they would step in. But then you have to ask the child's permission, or ask the child, can we call the parent in and I will talk to them. You don't have to say anything if you don't feel comfortable. And a lot of children like that, because sometimes they think they want to say that's going to get them in trouble, in inverted commas. And then I say, I'm not worried. I'm an adult. I'll say it. They can be cross with me. I'll be your voice. So we talk about being the voice of that child if they don't feel they have a voice in their system.
And you mentioned, you touched on the parent as the wounded child. How do we, obviously, they need lots of care too. How do we? Is there a process of being able to access that child, or how do we work with the parents then to heal those wounds?
And I think that's
obviously it's a huge question.
Yeah, but, that is a huge question, not a simple answer. But a wounded person has usually suffered some form of trauma. So trauma in the modern day definition is anything that overwhelms your coping mechanisms. So if you've had an experience as a young child and you then had it as a 20 or 30-year-old, you would experience it completely different because of that prefrontal cortex that was still developing. You wouldn't realize if somebody was playing a joke on you, or if it was just an accident that X, Y, and Z happened. Children are egocentric up until the age of six. So anything negative that happens around them, they believe it's their fault. So a lot of children carry a lot of shame and guilt, which becomes their inner voice, their inner persecutor. You're bad. You're always making mistakes. You can never do anything right. No one will ever love you. And those inner voices are your wounding. So trauma is stored in the right-hand side of your brain. That's the limbic system. And their art, it's everything creative, is how you process that trauma. So creative activities, that's why music is so powerful. That's why being creative is so powerful. And being in creation is so healing as well. Because they've actually taken inner city kids and adults that there's just concrete everywhere. There's hardly any green. They never get to be in touch with proper nature. And the depression rates are huge and high, and anxiety. And they take those individuals and they take them to an area, rural area or a coastal area, and they allow them to commune in nature. And depression is alleviated, if not completely gone. Anxiety levels totally start decreasing. So it really is, there is power in nature to heal. Just sitting and watching the waves and that continual movement, or walking and watching a sunset or a sunrise, or hearing the nature, seeing the seasons playing out. There's so much of life in that.
So just being in nature is being in a constantly creative and recreative space, and that accesses the creative element within the person's psyche and within their brain, and then brings a calming influence.
Absolutely, we've seen that.
That's about right.
Very much
wow.
So.
That's amazing. I mean, I certainly, when I'm in nature, that's how I feel. But I just thought that was just. But so you say, perhaps looking at it from that creative side is and I guess does your belief system around nature and creation, if we use that word, does that impact that? So let's say you're in a faith that is a creation-based faith. So God created the world, and so for when you're in nature, you're looking at His creation, and therefore that you feel part of that. Does our belief system increase or decrease that, or does it not matter? It doesn't matter if you're a total atheist and believe in just that this all just happened. Then does that have a difference on the impact nature has on us?
I think that could definitely have an impact. I think the person would look to the creation as being what going for a walk would be healing for them, but they wouldn't understand why, possibly, and not look to it that. Whereas if I see creation and the absolute perfection in the minute detail and the variety and the scale, I look to the creator, but someone else might not do that. And that could be from experiences in the past, and it could be conditioning, and it could be different belief systems. But I think you're going to be far more able to question, at least, what is your worldview if you were in nature than sitting in an office just staring at a screen all day.
Absolutely. So that's so fascinating, and just looking at it from this kind of more mental side of things or brain side of things is very interesting. To kind of move away a little bit away from that and back into play, I'm just thinking of myself. I had a lot of opportunity to play in nature as a child, and I'm sure that had a profound impact on me. But I also became very interested in sports and competitive games, and I wonder how. And I was just chatting to some friends earlier on how competition maybe takes out some of the play elements. So like more recently, I'm in my 50s now. I came back to cricket after a long period, and I'm enjoying it so much more because even while I'm competing, but I'm so much more aware of the play element and the fun associated with just playing and having a go and just being in a group of guys on the field, having a good time. And, and I can think back when I was perhaps in my teens, early 20s and 30s, it was all about the result and winning. And there were probably games that I won that I didn't really enjoy, and games that I lost that I really did enjoy. And I lost some of that playful element. And I wonder if that's looking at just all the age ranges that you work with, from little kids all the way through to adults. How does competition, play, playfulness, and games?
I think it's very interesting you ask that, because I can definitely notice there is a temperament type that is extremely competitive. And you can see it within the first session when the child comes in. All ages.
All ages.
But obviously with play, you're going to notice it more. But even in talking with teenagers, you can pick it up. The children that are driving themselves, they want to be on the Student Learning Council. They want to get a grade, an A or an 85%. They're pushing. Sometimes it might be from the environment that they're in. But I would hazard a guess that at least 50%, or if not more, is actually a temperament type. So you are born with that drive to want to succeed, to be competitive. So if you have that, it's not wrong. But if you have parents pushing you, that would put it into a very stressful environment. Then there's another aspect. So besides temperament, then there is the environment, whether you're receiving pressure, be it not from your family, but from your school, because you're showing potential and the school's pushing you. Or it could be from a low self-esteem. And it could be all three. Then you're really going to find it more challenging. I think I know myself, very competitive. By nature, I would drive myself. My parents would actually tell me to please stop. And in one side, I liked that because it took the pressure off from them. But on the other side, it actually bothered me, because did they not see how hard I was working to get what I wanted to do? So, but parents will always be the one blamed when something goes wrong, especially when you're young children. But there is very much that low self-esteem. If somebody is getting their self-worth by their achievements, That's problematic. So to me, whenever, I do get children coming who are putting a lot of pressure on themselves. They're usually struggling with anxiety, or they are battling to contain their emotions when they are in a competitive environment, say on the sports field, and they're becoming aggressive. That then becomes problematic. So I often see those children. So there you have to begin by building up your self-worth. You are not what you achieve. You are who you are. And inherently, you must love who you are, not for what you do. And you obviously have to coach the parents too around that. And then you have to teach them emotional regulation. When you're feeling triggered, I can understand you're upset, you wanted to win. There's nothing wrong with that. But how are you going to manage that disappointment? And that's what we teach them, tools. So it again comes back to where we started right at the beginning, which is self-awareness. What am I feeling and why? And if you can take away from this podcast one thing, Tim, or your listeners, I would love it to be whatever I am thinking will determine what I am feeling. And what I'm feeling is going to come out in my behavior. So if there's something in the behavior that we don't like, we've got to go back to what were we feeling and what were we thinking. And that's self-awareness, my thoughts as well as my emotions.
And the thinking, obviously, in that is the thinking, feeling, behaviors. And the thinking, perhaps, does that come from the environment or the environmental pressures, or it's based on stuff from the past, right? So we preface, or we look at ourselves where we are now.
Absolutely.
Based on how that thing might have happened in the past, or what we can predict from that. How do we go back and reach? How do we go back and address those? Is that something that needs counseling? Does that something that, how do people, obviously if you can find someone who can help you access those and heal those wounds, but some people like to do things on their own. What kind of general things could you advise people?
I would say the first step would to become aware of what your thoughts are. I mean, we are thinking 60 billion different thoughts in one day, of which very few we are consciously aware of what we're thinking. So if you can become more conscious of what you've been thinking, you will find that you will either have a very strong inner encourager or an inner persecutor, which is your internal dialogue. And that comes from your upbringing, from your past experiences. Trauma could have put that in there. It might just have been poor parenting. You must become aware of that, because you can't change something unless you're aware of it. So if you realize I'm incredibly critical of myself, you could maybe trace it back to a highly critical parent or a highly critical, some significant adult, teacher, coach. Because of that prefrontal cortex, they didn't have the capacity to understand the abstract. And maybe that somebody said something as a joke, which you took personally. It then became your inner voice. And more things happen in life. And so, like an onion, a layer and a layer and a layer compacts that internal lie or that negative self-talk. And it becomes habitual. So only when we realize we actually have a lot of shame talk or anger talk or self-criticism talk, or maybe boosting yourself, grandiosity talk on the other end of the scale, it's very good to become aware of what you're thinking. And if you're feeling something you don't like, immediately pause and think, what was I just thinking? And it is a skill that you can train yourself to do. Because once you can realize, I was actually thinking about that conversation I had with somebody, and now I'm feeling decidedly unsettled. What unsettled feeling is that called? Is that an anxious feeling? Is that a disgust? Is that a shame? Is that a fear? And then you can start thinking, what was I thinking? Incredibly important to start journaling some of these comments, because once you're aware,
so you just have a book, you write these things down in.
Yes, and then you might find that you have a couple of very common sayings that will flit into your mind in a split second, because our brain is the most phenomenal organ. but it's also incredibly lazy. It will keep going down the same pathway. If anything seems vaguely familiar, if it recognizes a familiar feeling or saying or tone of voice, it doesn't even hear the detail anymore. It shoots to that same place of feeling. So to begin your work would first have to become aware. That would be the first, and that is a lot of self-work.
That's a good place for all of us to start at any stage, really, is awareness of what am I thinking. And then perhaps you say the next step is how am I feeling with that? What's the thought? And then what's the feeling? And then you go to behaviors. And I'm just wondering, for people who don't have a behavior as such, or not an observable behavior, we talk about some work in body work as embodiment. So some of that, is it possible that if you don't have the behavior, that has an effect somewhere else in the body? So maybe it's a tension in your shoulders. So it's not a behavior as such, but it's certainly represented as something in your body. Is that possible?
100%. 100%. We know that every single feeling has, or the thoughts release a chemical. So if you are angry, you are releasing a specific chemical. If you're not going to release it in a good way, talking with somebody or writing it out, in a negative way, screaming and shouting and breaking things, and if you suppress it, it will sit inside certain parts of your body. And fascinating research is showing that anger and unforgiveness and bitterness, a whole horde of physical ailments cluster around that. And then there's another cluster of fear, anxiety, and stress, which has different physical ailments that cluster around that. And then the third...
Wow, so they actually group them according to the emotion, yeah?
Yes, like the anger, heart.
And the third one? Sorry.
Anger is heart, just to give you one example. But the third one is lack of self-worth and self-hatred or poor self-esteem. That, a lot of addictions, that is the core there. So you can see how it is impacting the body. Absolutely it is. So it might not be a behavior, as you say, an observable behavior, but then carrying in your body, most definitely.
It's changing the body's behavior.
Absolutely.
So that
yes.
You might have an outward behavior, but your body might be having an inward behavior.
They've often said that depression is often a suppressed anger.
Oh, I mean, yeah, exactly. And, you can sometimes access that through body work. So we can sometimes say, like, can you, once people become aware and they start feeling, and then later when we become even more aware, we can start feeling where that is in the body, and we get people to put a hand on it or focus on it. And that can sometimes help bring it up. But that's obviously deep work and needs to be guided too. So obviously different layers of this, and having someone to guide you through it is, and it's not easy work,
it's not
easy. And it takes time. And just when you think you've got that one sorted out, there's another one.
Well, we are in a process, a journey of life, and the more work we do on ourselves, the more we know how much more work we need to do. But there, to me, the guiding is that I must look outside of myself. I can't do everything. I need a higher power to help me in this process.
That's brilliant, Sue. Thank you so much for your time and your wisdom and your experience and sharing with us. I suppose the take home is just looking at down in my notes is the first one I wrote down is play is the language of the child. So as parents, just looking at play and allowing our kids to play and letting them choose to play, and not perhaps directing so much, and letting them play, and just listening to that language. And that's a natural state. Play is our natural state, and we can go back there and access that too. And the looking for safety, and how our emotions are still kind of changing our prefrontal cortex right up to the age of 25. That's amazing. And just to, as we finished off with, what am I thinking? How does that make me feel? And what behaviors is that eliciting? And so if we become aware of their behavior, the feeling, or the thinking, we can always go back to where that thinking is from. So yeah, that's also helpful for us. Thank you. So before we sign off, I just where can people reach you if they want to ask some more questions or find out about your workshops or your personal work? I know your counseling diary is super full and a waiting list, but I know you also have some workshops and things. How could people reach you if they wanted to contact you?
Okay, thanks very much, Tim. Yes, I think the best would possibly be to email me, and my email address is Sue, SUEVD, Spay, SPUY, @gmail.com. So my name is Sue Funder Spay, so it's Sue VD Spay @gmail.com.
Okay, I'll put that down in the stuff associated with with this chat today. Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you so much, Sue, for your time and for your gifts. Thanks so much. Thank you so much for listening to The Natural You. I hope you got something useful out of this episode. If you think someone might benefit from hearing this, please share it with them. Lastly, I'd love it if you hit the subscribe button and rate and review this podcast. See you next week.